Welcome to a special edition of Geopolitics and Empire. I think it's the first time we're doing a foursome here on the podcast. And before I introduce my guests, let me remind folks to subscribe to the Substack. It's the best way to keep Geopolitics and Empire on the air. Become a paid subscriber. The monthly fee is a little over $9 a month, or a little over $90 a year or more. We do private weekly Zoom chats with the group, shooting the breeze on current events, and I do a weekly write-up of all the most important headlines of the week and my own commentary. You can also donate through Buy Me a Coffee, Donor Box Wise, that sort of stuff, and purchase a consult if you want to chat with me about expatriation, geopolitics, or the meaning of life. And do check out all of my affiliates: EasyDNS, Legal Shield, Escape the Technocracy. It's a great course by my friend Gabriel on escaping the technocracy. Wise Wolf Gold for gold, Above Phone for the de-Googled phone. There are coupon codes that give you discounts. That's all over at the website. And leave a podcast review on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to Geopolitics and Empire. And joining us are Paul Cudenec of winteroak.org.uk. He's been a guest before on the podcast, and he does great work. Etienne de la Boetie², author of Government, the Biggest Scam in History. I've got that book right here. Let's plug that. And Crow of Nevermore Media. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, dudes.
Thanks for having me.
And so, this is, we'll be talking anarchy and voluntarism, which all three of you are involved in. You've got this conference coming up in Sedona in November, which people can still plan to participate and attend. And I thought, just a quick disclaimer or preamble on my part. Crow, you wrote a Substack recently, and I just want to say I personally am not an anarchist. I generally don't like to be any ist or ism apart from Christian, but where there are certain principles in some of these ists or isms, I shall take them. And I think some of these principles are universal and timeless and objective truth. And they've existed probably, before they were given a name, anarchism or voluntarism. There are elements of libertarianism, which I appreciate, but I don't believe libertarianism as a complete ideology works, because in my opinion, man is faulty and we can't come up with the perfect operating system ourselves. But anarchy and or voluntarism, I'm living a few steps away from anarchy here in Mexico, but there are elements of anarchy that can very much be appreciated. Who doesn't love seeing less of the state in their daily life? And so, with my little preamble there out of the way, anarchism, voluntarism, there's this talk of rebranding. What is going on? Anyone jump into the fray here?
Well, I could, because I suppose that I was the one that lined this discussion up, basically because Etienne was inviting me to, or was asking me to kind of promote his upcoming voluntarism gathering in Sedona. And I said, sure, yeah, I'd love to. And then he asked me to put him in touch with Paul. And then I reached out to Paul, said, who agreed. And then I thought that it would be really interesting to get the two of them talking, because they sort of represent two different camps of anarchism, which are now seeing each other as allies. So I'm from Canada, where the anarchist movement was more associated with the left. And I saw anarcho-capitalism, or I don't think that's the term that Etienne uses, but I saw that as an American thing, gun-loving, right-wing libertarians, the don't tread on me type people. And it was an American thing. It wasn't something that I thought about very much. And then when COVID happened, basically, I was very disappointed to see the collapse of the left and the anarchist movement in the part of the world where I live. And then I went to Anarcho Poco, and I met Etienne and others, and I met Derek Bros and some very inspiring people. And I started to see how there was a potential basis for unity And there are differences of opinion. There are historic differences in, how the movements have tended to frame things, perceive things, and go about things. But I think that now we're living in basically a new era where it makes sense for people to come together on, what we do have in common. And I think that, if we're going to contest the, technocracy or the new normal or whatever we want to call it, then we need numbers and we need to kind of get on the same page. And I see Etienne as being one of the leaders of doing that. Like he's organizing a conference. He's organizing in real life, which is something that I really appreciate, because I think that that's where we need to go if we're going to make a difference in the real world.
So I would like to say that I think it's quite interesting that voluntarism, from what I've read about what it is about, it is so similar to what I see as anarchism. I think there's a lot of terminology which comes in the way of proper communication. It's something I've noticed in the last few years, that capitalism doesn't mean at all the same thing to a lot of Americans as it does to certainly to the European left, of which I suppose I was vaguely part of. I don't like the terms left and right, and I'm trying to get away from them as much as possible. But I mean, what I've always meant, I used to talk about capitalism a lot. What I meant is the same system that we now would call the globalist world order, or what we now call the criminocracy. I meant, and a lot of people who use that term here mean the system as a whole, with being private corporations and big business that uses the state in order to impose its agenda on the population, and which is pretty much what you're against, isn't it, Etienne, as far as I can understand it?
Definitely. And so I wanted to, because you just brought up a very important point, it's important to define the terms. And so when I use the word anarchy, it's very different, I think, from what is known in popular culture. The word just means no rulers. It doesn't mean no rules. But because the rulers don't want the population to know that there's an option on the menu called no rulers, I break down in my book, Government, the Biggest Scam in History, how they've actually changed the dictionary by comparing the 1827 definition of anarchy from the Webster's dictionary with the modern version definition of anarchy from the Merriam-Webster's dictionary. And it has been changed to kind of chaos and dystopia. And when I say the word voluntaryism, voluntaryism achieves kind of the same thing. There's not a ruler, but it does so kind of from a moral high ground. It's the idea that all relations among human beings must be voluntary. Nobody has rights that other people don't have. Nobody has exceptions from morality, especially the government. And nobody has the ring of power because there isn't a ring of power. And so that really achieves the exact same thing that anarchy would achieve, no ruler, because you can't have a ruler if all relationships between human beings must be voluntary. But when you use the word voluntarism, you're coming at the problem of the scam of government. And, you can't, in my book, I break down, you can't have a moral, legitimate, logical government. You can't delegate rights that you don't have yourself to a representative to represent you doing something you can't do yourself. You can't be bound by a social contract you didn't sign. So government has been the biggest scam in history. And so voluntarism really kind of meets the need of anarchists. But at the same time, it does it from this moral high ground. And unlike the term anarchy, which has had its meaning changed by the rulers who don't want the population to know there's an option on the menu called no rulers, most people either have a positive view of voluntarism, or they've never heard the term. And so now you get this greenfield opportunity to say, oh, well, voluntarism, what's that? Well, let me explain. All relations should be voluntary. And it's very, very positive. You're not having to kind of backtrack and repair all of the damage done to the word no rulers. you can kind of start afresh. And so that's one of the reasons why I've adopted it and encourage other people in favor of a stateless society and exposing the scam of government to adopt it as well.
If I could just add, the definitions what you guys are talking about, I think is important. And I just see both voluntarism and anarchism overlapping, almost like brothers, because if you're going to have anarchy, the relations will be based on them being voluntary, right? And so it's kind of like they're both intertwined. And Paul's work, I've loved for the longest time. Criminocracy, I love that term. I like Mark Passio's occultocracy. And what you mentioned about capitalism, they've reframed all of these paradigms. So I think at this point you have to realize that it's fascist. The globalists are this public-private partnership, and if you start pointing out how much of this private corporate power is part of the globalist arm, they'll start calling, "Are you an anti-capitalist? You must be a communist." And I'm like, well, I'm not I'm anti-socialist. I'm anti-communist. I'm anti-fascist. I'm not pro, having Elon Musk's Tesla and SpaceX and IBM run the whole world, right? And so I think they've really done a number on scrambling the eggs, so to speak. But anyone jump in, continue here. I'm a little bit out of my depth here when it comes to anarchism and voluntarism.
Well, I'll just say I like the term oligarchical kleptocracy, which is rule by a small number of thieves, because that's really what's going on. It's a kleptocracy where I call it intergenerational organized crime centered around banking and central banking has given banks the ability to create money out of thin air. They're using their little paper tickets and digital dollars to buy up everything in the world, starting with the media, so nobody understands what's really going on because the media is all deception and distraction. And they're using government, the technique of government. Government's best thought of as a technique for robbing and controlling societies. They're using that technique to rob and control the population by giving themselves an exemption from morality, the ability to make up rules for everybody, the ability to steal the wealth of others. They're waging an economic warfare on the population where they're keeping us artificially poor through confiscatory taxation and by stealing the value out of everybody's money. The money should be buying in a voluntarist world. The money would buy more and more every year as innovations and productivity improvements reduce the cost of manufacturing and distributing the necessities and luxuries of life. But instead, we have the money losing value every year in what I believe is kind of like an economic warfare. But it's criminals at the top, and the technique that they're using to rob and control us is government.
Yeah, I agree. That's exactly what it is. I mean, we're actually living inside one big crime. Everything that happens in our society is a theft, as you say, and that should be at the heart of anarchist analysis. And I think it might have been at one stage, but we now got to this sorry state of affairs where to even suggest that there might be some bad actors that have got an inordinate amount of power is conspiracy theory and is very bad and right wing and completely impossible for any sort of contemporary woke anarchists to contemplate. So certainly anarchism as well. Crow and I have had a number of discussions about this over the years. That whatever name you use, but the idea of anarchism, the anarchist movement, does need to be sort of rebooted because it has lost in its current incarnation. It has lost the thread entirely. But not only from being maligned from the outside, but also being the people inside it claiming to represent it don't actually understand what it's really saying anymore. So yeah, I think there's certainly a good argument to be made for just stripping away all that misunderstanding and deceit and just getting back to the basics of what we see as wrong and what sort of things could be done to get it right again. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something actually Paul has been working on for years, before kind of the anarchist left bit the dust in 2020. I mean, its descent had begun sooner than that, but it really ground to a shuddering halt in March 2020 and has not really recovered since. And that's the organic radicalism. Paul, do you think you could say a bit about that?
Yes, sure. Well, I suppose that was my own personal attempt at rebranding anarchism, but it's a bit more than that, because it's taking in other currents of thought that might not be seen normally to be close to anarchism, including perennialism. This is a thing that I think that was one of the first things that grabbed you, Crow, was I was writing about anarcho-perennialism. It was bringing this sort of traditionalist thought of René Guénon and Ananda Kumaraswamy and people like that, which in fact there is in fact a link with anarchism, because René Guénon was introduced to Sufism by an anarchist, Ivan Agueli, and Kumaraswamy was an anarchist. He was but a very intellectual anarchist, and now there's this sort of divide between that type of thinking and anarchism, in that not only do anarchists think of all of those, the conventional anarchists, if we can call them that, they think of all those type of thinkers as hopelessly reactionary. But also the people that follow the traditionalist movement tend to be quite right-wing and hostile towards anarchism, and not open to seeing that there could be a recombining of the two ideas, because, as I say, they were together originally. Not all. So there is some progress being made here, and there's some connection being made. I mean, the number of other threads, well, I've been trying to work into this organic radical pantheon of thinkers, really. I mean, it's not that I think I can do it all myself, but just to set that thing in motion of breaking down these false orders that they've created, these false boxes that they've built, really, against different types of thinking. So I think it's a deliberate way of, it's divide and rule on an ideological, philosophical level, to make certain ideas seem completely incompatible with each other, so that you can't reconstruct an overview of a real rooted for opposition to their system and everything that it stands for. I suppose that's it in a nutshell.
If I could I've got a question. So as I understand it, Crow and Paul, you guys are like the anarchists, I guess we can brand you, and then Etienne, I guess you're leading the charge on voluntarism. But I sort of viewed you both as like anarchists or voluntarists. Have you identified with both, or how do you see it?
Well, you can call me an anarchist in the sense that I don't believe that, I'm for no rulers. I don't believe that you can have a legitimate moral government. I think the question that I would want to throw into, as we kind of find common ground, I think one of the other things that is associated with voluntarism that is not associated with every flavor of anarchism that is something that might be a little bit differentiating is that, voluntarism is kind of pro-free market, pro-markets. It's the idea that the world is kind of like a self-organizing system. It produces spontaneous order, and the market dynamic will produce all of the services that government provides better, faster, and cheaper than a monopoly provider in government. And so if you really kind of think about like what the government does, most of it is it's providing services, whether that service is delivering the mail or that service is the FAA controlling, air traffic in the United States, or running the worst passenger train system in the country, or providing, parks and recreation and things like that. And so from a kind of voluntarist standpoint, the market would provide every single thing the government does except redistribution. You can't rob Peter to pay Paul. But, market forces could provide better retirement security than Social Security. Market forces could provide better armed protective services than the monopoly police, but they wouldn't have rights that the population doesn't have. They wouldn't be able to arrest you for smoking a plant. They wouldn't be able to arrest you for, gambling or things like that. But there would be a market dynamic where ADT or, Brinks would compete to offer security services in your neighborhood. It would probably come with an alarm system. You'd probably have to pay $75 a month. It would probably cost you overall, in the cost of the year, less than you would pay than the monopoly provider of the police through your property taxes. But at the end of the day, because Brinks and ADT are competing to see who protects the neighborhood more and are trying to get restitution versus retribution, they would compete on who provides better restitution to you, who can get you your money back if you get robbed or things like that. And those market dynamics would produce better public goods than a monopoly provider produces. And so I wanted to just kind of throw that out there, and I wanted to see if Crow and Paul agree with that, or they disagree, or, I wanted to, find out where we all stand on market dynamics.
There are parts of it I agree with, and there are parts that I don't agree with. So one thing that I believe is kind of core to the idea that anarchism could work on a large scale is spontaneous order. So that is the idea that things don't need to be planned from the top down. They can emerge from the bottom up with people meeting their needs independently. And I think that there's plenty of examples of that happening. I'm a huge fan of David Graeber, who has studied stateless societies around the world, and I'm kind of following in his footsteps and doing the same. And I think that where I might disagree with you is in how exactly it would all work. Because I like to say that everybody loves money, but everybody hates banks. Well, banks issue money. So, I'm not saying that there wouldn't be a market in a stateless society. Of course, there's going to be a way for people to exchange goods. But I think that it's difficult to imagine whatever is going to be past this time of turmoil that we're currently going through. But my class analysis has changed in the last few years. And I think that, I think that we really need to step out of the shadow of the Cold War and thinking that, communism is the opposite of capitalism. Capitalism is the opposite of communism. I think that this is a different version of the Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. They always love to, present the playing field of acceptable discourse with two sides, and I think that the Soviet Union, its attempt to abolish markets failed, very quickly. The great French anthropologist Marcel Mauss then wrote a book called Essay on the Gift, where he studied different societies to look at what alternative economic systems that could exist, might look like. And that's something that I've become very interested in. I haven't found answers yet, but in terms of my class analysis, I think that grouping together, billionaires with small business owners is dumb. It doesn't make sense. They're not the same class. They have different class interests. They behave in very different ways. And I think that there's a lot to be desired in the kind of capitalism versus communist framing. And I also think that there's this problem of what some call the professional managerial class, which is a huge problem in Canada. There's a giant government bureaucracy, and these people are the people who, tend to vote for the Liberal Party. They get large salaries. They don't contribute to society very much. And so the class dynamics have changed. We're not talking about bourgeoisie versus proletariat. So I think that, Paul is a virulent anti-Marxist, and I'm maybe less virulent than he is, but I'm an anti-Marxist as well. And I think that we need to reimagine things. And I think everybody's got a bit of the picture. I think that one of the really positive things that have happened in the last 5 years are the people of different political persuasions are having these kinds of conversations. And I feel like if we all kind of put our minds together, then I have the faith in the spontaneous order that generates when people bump their ideas into each other.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree with most of that, I think. I mean, I also see a big difference between small businesses, people growing stuff and selling it at the market and making things and exchanging or selling in some way, which all seems like natural to me. That seems like a natural, organic way of living, of organizing a society. But I see a great difference between that and the involvement of big companies. I mean, you mentioned Brinks or something like that. I don't see that big companies are motivated by the sort of sense of communal well-being. I think they're the way they're structured now. If we're talking about the same entities continuing into a future world, is that they're purely based around profit, and and their interest is just in getting as much money in and providing as little service as possible, because that is there's institutionally what companies have to do. They have to prioritize, if they've got shareholders and the rest of it, they have to prioritize the dividends and the well-being of those the investors who are providing the money behind it. So I don't see that kind of market. I mean, the little market, yes, but the big capitalistic market I see as a negative force, and also very much linked in with the state-controlled society that we're in today. I mean, they depend on the state to exist, to impose rules, which mean that people have to take part in their economic system, is the way I'd put it. Like the state will impose the confiscation of land. I mean, originally, my ancestors in England were thrown off the land during the enclosures during several hundred years. It was the state that sent in the army to throw them off the land. And it was the private companies that benefited from these people who could no longer support themselves in the way they had done and were forced to go and work in the new factories with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And so finally, I should add that my vision of the future, though it's an anarchist one, is also anti-industrial. I mean, my preferred future would be not only decentralized, but also de-industrialized, in the sense of the sort of industry we have now would be. I'd be going into a future where we were producing for the need as agreed by the community, rather than for profit, or for this production for profit, which is what we're under now. So again, the market forces that you mentioned would seem to me to be leading away from that kind of wisdom and long-term stability into taking up again the sort of disastrous race of consumerism and industrialism that has landed us in the sort of society we're in today.
So I do want to address one thing.
Just a question, Etienne, before throwing it back to you. What you said earlier. I'm not necessarily against. I like what Paul said. I like smaller, decentralized stuff. But what you mentioned before that, Etienne, was Brinks and that sort of stuff. I'm not per se against a good-sized company, but my fear becomes, how do you prevent, in the 1900s, in my opinion, one good thing that the American government at least did was antitrust, breaking up big monopolies. So you kept preventing this beast from growing too big, which I think is what everyone wants. And so in the voluntarist world, how would you prevent some Brinks from becoming like the next, Bill Gates, Microsoft, or something like that?
So it's a great question. I used Brinks and ADT as examples because they're companies that are providing armed protective services today, and they've already kind of established a name brand, reputation. And I wanted to kind of make the point that there's, that it doesn't have to be government. And in fact, there are private companies that are doing it without, trampling on people's rights and arresting people for gambling and for smoking plants today. That the structure that we have today of mega, Fortune 500 companies, I believe, is a product of the government and the monetary system. So you have the banks creating money out of thin air. They're providing unlimited capital to a certain handful of corporations. They're operating as a cartel. They're providing this capital to these certain favored corporations to buy up and consolidate and monopolize their own industries. And that's the dynamic. It's, like I said, it's organized crime at the top, and they're operating as a cartel, and they're being provided this unlimited capital at the expense of all the other market participants that have to use the money that they're mandating by government fiat. And so if the government went away, the banks would not be able to engage in this fractional reserve banking. They would not be able to provide unlimited capital to certain favored corporations. And I don't believe that you would see the same level of monopolization that you see today. I agree with Paul and Crow. I'm all for local, decentralized, small, communities. But at the same time, I also realize that with, billions of participants around the world, and, the realities that people want avocados in January and strawberries in February, and that we're going to have to be shipping things at scale and have to be building things, to satisfy billions of people around the world, you're not going to get away from large scale companies. Now, I want those large scale companies to be owned and managed by people on merit, based on how well they satisfy the consumer, how they're able to get the cost out of the luxuries and the necessities of life, versus what we have right now, where those large companies are dominated in a kind of cartel mafia system, where they're being provided this unlimited capital, they're buying up and they're consolidating their lesser financed brethren, and it hurts consumers. And so, I think that if you got rid of government, you'd see that system, which is not capitalism all. It's actually called cronyism, is the correct term. You'd see cronyism go away, because there wouldn't be a ring of power for the government to give these corporations deals. You wouldn't have the government mandate that children have to have vaccines. You wouldn't have the government mandate that you have to put ethanol in the gasoline. You wouldn't have the government mandate that only you have to go to government schools. You wouldn't have the government mandate that only you can use the government's court system for dispute resolution. And so without the government forcing everybody literally at the point of a gun, you'd see a very, very different world, especially if you got rid of these organized crime banks on the top and the cartel companies that they're empowering.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with a lot of that. I think that criminocracy is the term that has kind of emerged thanks to Paul instead of capitalism. I think userocracy would also be an appropriate term, because I wanted to mention, by the way, that Paul, you might not, I don't know if you got this idea directly from Etienne, but he's the one that's really popularized this idea of government as organized crime. That was, I think, the title of his book, or anyway, it was an idea that he promoted, and it was later picked up by Whitney Webb, and then later by you. I don't know if there was any direct inspiration there, but I think that there is this userocracy, this speculation, this economic system that you could call casino capitalism as well, because it's increasingly detached from real products and services. You have these paper industries, finance, insurance, real estate as well. That's just a huge amount of the economic output of a country like the U.S. is just paperwork. It's just moving paper around, basically. And that's not real value. And idea of a real economy would be one that is sort of suited to human needs. And I mean, personally, I think that there's assumptions of economics that don't hold up. We have this idea of the maximizing individual who does the most, who always wants to obtain the maximum result for the least possible effort. And I mean, that person would be an asshole, that is a description of a corporation, because a corporation by its very structure has to act in that way, because, executives can be replaced if they don't prioritize maximizing profits. And I think that's one potential kind of way of resolving this problem is ending corporate personhood. And this was one of the suggestions of the Occupy movement, which, by the way, studying the Occupy movement is really worthwhile because it is the last time that there was a populist movement in the U.S. that had broad popular appeal to left and right, at least initially. And everybody could sort of agree that the economic system is unjust, that people are stuck in debt traps, that, corporate person and the legalized bribery that's in the economic system. And this is something that I still like talking about, the 99%, because I think that to have a movement that can claim to speak on behalf of the 99%, then it can't be, super specific on things, because people, you have Democrats and Republicans in the US, you have 300,000 police officers, you have 2 million members of the armed forces in the US, so to claim to speak on the part of the 99% is necessarily to present a sort of less radical vision. But the process of searching for common ground with people of different walks of life, religions, ethnicities, ideological persuasions, I think is a really useful purpose and necessary if we want to create a populist movement. And if we're not trying to create a populist movement, then I guess the alternative would be secessionism, or going to a specific area and trying to live, in the way that you want to with, the people who want to live in that way. And that's the alternative. But who knows before you just get rolled over that way. I kind of think we need a populist movement. I kind of think that the world is ready for it. I kind of think that the world was ready for it in 2011 when the Occupy movement popped off, but there wasn't the analysis, there wasn't the strategy. And so part of my question would be maybe to all of you, it's if Occupy happened tomorrow, what should we promote as the thing that we're for?
Voluntaryism. It's the thing that everybody can get behind. It's the thing that doesn't have any baggage. It's the thing that gives you that really, all of the problems that you were identifying is an issue of the government. Corporate personhood. There wouldn't be corporations without the government. The government is what charters corporations and gives board directors immunity from the crimes that the corporation might commit. And so if you got rid of government, you would lose that corporate personhood. And so I think the world is really coming to the realization that the government is the problem in most areas. It's almost never the solution. And just take a look at what happened in Hurricane Helene, where the Cajun Navy and individual helicopter owners came together spontaneously, and they began delivering aid to hurricane victims, while FEMA has made itself a joke and is trying to sabotage their efforts because the efforts of private citizens make their incompetence look bad. And so when you take a look, who do you want that money to go to? Do you want it to go to the Cajun Navy, or do you want it to go to FEMA? And most people, 99% of people, would give their money to the Cajun Navy over FEMA. So that's the populist movement it's already happening. I just want to accelerate it and get people focused in the right direction of understanding that, number one, government is illegitimate, and number two, that the market would do a better job, better, faster, and cheaper if the government would just get out of the way.
I agree that we do need a populist movement. I mean, that's why I've been very enthusiastic about the so-called freedom movement, the truth and freedom movement, since COVID. Although I've been disappointed with some of the people involved in it, obviously. But But there's that spirit seems to me to be important, and even though some of the spokespeople maybe are a bit dodgy and not to be trusted, I think the grassroots, the people who subscribe to those same basic ideas and who are saying. And by the way, I didn't know that Etienne had directly started saying that government was organised crime, but I might have indirectly picked up on that via Whitney Webb and others, and I've sort of seen it for myself.
Technically, I say intergenerational organized crime.
Yeah, well, that's completely. Yeah. I mean, I've written a pamphlet about the Rothschilds, who very much tick that box. So, I've seen the detail as well as the theory. But there are a lot of people out there now who are talking about this stuff. And I saw it before the COVID period with the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests here in France, which I started out. I was reporting on them, doing interviews with them, and eventually I realised that I was actually in that movement myself. Although being English in France, I didn't feel perhaps that I was quite as legitimate as the French people who were out demonstrating. But it was a sort of forerunner of the truth and freedom movement, really. It drew people from all sorts of political backgrounds and none. I mean, in fact, a lot of them had no previous political involvement, just a sense that there was something wrong with the world, with society, and that they were being robbed by some anonymous power above, and they identified it as both corporate and governmental. And the Gilets jaunes did have some protests against the Rothschilds and BlackRock and the rest of it. They were pretty much on the right course. So I think it's always there. That sort of populist movement is always bubbling away, even if it doesn't have a name or it doesn't have a form at a particular time. It's an energy there that is waiting to be harnessed. Because it obviously is, because it is the vast majority of people who are being manipulated and controlled and exploited and robbed blind by a small bunch of organized criminals, as you say. So there's some basis for opposition and resistance in that situation.
I guess I wanted to ask as well everyone's thoughts on the state of the populist resistance to the criminocracy, the occultocracy, the intergenerational organized crime. I often find the case that when things get really, really bad, when the boot, most people will not react. If they're living in comfort, they're not going to speak against COVID-1984 until the boot is on their face. And you can see examples like in Mexico when the government really crosses the line on some issue. People get their pitchforks and they go to the parliament office. And so, just people's thoughts on the state of populist resistance to this global tyranny around the world. I'm in many ways pessimistic right now, but also the state of alternative media. A lot of shenanigans we're seeing in this some people call it new narrative network, mainstream alternative media. And so, alternative media has been chugging along for a long time. Independent media. I don't even necessarily identify with some of these terms, again, because I don't like to really identify with labels. But we see, time and time again, the states come in through the back door and try to remake themselves in alternative media. And then a lot of us kind of figure that out and we move away from that. And then they pop up again and they just keep coming back. And so your thoughts sort of on the state of this populism across the planet. We're all in different jurisdictions, as well as, alternative media today. I want
to jump in here because I have like a good news message here. And so one of the things that I'm seeing, at least with my audience and the growth of my audience and what I'm trying to do with like my book, Government, the Biggest Scam in History Exposed, is really show how people have been tricked into this belief in government. And so it's intergenerational organized crime. And they're controlling to Hrvoje's point, they're controlling the information that the public receives, either controlling it through the mandatory government school, teaching you that government is legitimate, desirable, and necessary before you're old enough to evaluate the logic and the morality of that claim, or they're reinforcing the universality of government with this monopoly media system where on every single channel, government is legitimate, government is the protector, government is the hero, whether that hero is Tom Cruise as Top Gun or Tom Cruise as CIA agent Ethan Hawke saving the world from, nuclear or, biological weapons disasters on a daily basis. But, they've been making the government the hero in popular movies, popular culture. The documentary Theaters of War breaks down how the Department of Defense and the intelligence agencies are behind thousands of movies and television shows where they're providing funding, they're providing weapon systems, the ability to shoot on military bases, they have script control, they're literally rewriting the history as most people understand it by rewriting the popular movies about what happened in wars or what's going on in just the United States with respect to the legitimacy of and desirability and necessity of government. And so that only goes so far until you understand how the magician is pulling the trick. Once you understand that the government is running game on the population, once you understand, oh, they're tricking me, they're giving the presidents halos, they're putting the presidents in front of pictures of Jesus Christ, they're running tricks and games and unethically manipulative techniques on the military, on the police, they're segmenting them away from the rest of the population, they're shaving their heads, they're putting them into the uniform, the single form, they're running, they're taking the toilets off the stalls in the Marine Corps so that the recruits never have a second to think about what they're doing during basic training, and that they're willing to, they're saying, hey, I'll kill whoever these people want me to kill, and question the morality of that. Once people realize that they're having game run on them, well, nobody wants to be a chump. Nobody wants to be a sucker. Nobody wants to get fooled. And so, once you can kind of explain to somebody how that crooked system is working and how they're tricking the population, well, most people are like, I'm out. I'm not, okay, you had me. Okay, I see what you're doing now. And we're in the middle of a one-way revolution. It's small right now, but it's gathering steam, and it's going to be exponential. You're not going to be able to hide from the fact that government has been running game on the population, unethically manipulative tricks and techniques for long in the information age. And so get ready for this to go supernova, get ready for this to go exponential, because there's no hiding that fact in the information age.
I thought I could just add an example of what you just laid out. Made me think of what happened over the weekend. A perfect example where people don't want to, be fooled, and they recognize the game with the medical countermeasures that began in 2020 that were forced upon the people of the entire planet, and they were forced. Now they're backtracking and saying, oh, they weren't mandatory, but if you want to eat, you got to take the shot. If you want to work, you want to see mommy and daddy, you want to travel. So I personally now know people who have been democided by this shot, and I'm talking about people like in their 40s, young people. And one person that I knew who just passed at the age of 42, who lived down the street from me, died of a heart attack, met his brother, who's extended Mexican family here, and he told me he had just had heart surgery. So his brother passed, and he had heart surgery. He had taken 2 shots. I had no idea, and he told me you were right, because I told him 4 years ago at dinner. He was asking me, should I take the countermeasures or not? I said, no, don't do it. And it turns out that he did. And kind of like what you just said, Etienne, he's realized the game is up. So a lot of people are now seeing that the jig is up. And so I hope, you're more hopeful than I am. So hopefully, this stuff does go supernova, that people start realizing the jig is up. And so, other people's
Can I jump in on that one too? I'm an optimist. I think that the conditions are right for a revolution in America. I think that, everything that you have, the economy sucks. You have multiple unpopular wars. The ruling class is now known to be engaged in like child sex trafficking, basically. People have lost their faith in the mainstream media. And, deception is essential ingredient to statecraft. You have to be able to fool the people. The name of the game is fooling the people. Well, that and divide and rule, and so there are people who are seeing through it. Then there is very much a concerted effort to, capture the people back. I just wrote an article about how Jordan Peterson, who I had some respect for I had a lot of respect for standing up against kind of the whole trans medicine thing, is now shilling for Zionism, and it's disheartening. So and then people like that, they're influencers. They influence people. People form some kind of emotional attachment to people they admire who are speaking on the internet or whatever. And so we need to be aware of those people, which is why I'm so happy that the Independent Media Alliance has come into being. Maybe you could talk about that, Hrvoje, because I think that's something that we need, because I do this like it's a full-time job, like I am writing, I'm reading, I'm researching. And, if I was working 40 hours a week and taking care of kids, I would not have the time to be able to figure things out. And so I'm not saying that I have everything figured out, but I can look into somebody's background and decide whether they're trustworthy or not. Not everybody has the time to do that. So one thing that I've been willing to do is to call people out of being controlled opposition. I just wrote something the other day about how Matthew Ehret and Cynthia Chung are controlled opposition. They're shilling for bricks. And I think that we need to be willing to do that, because otherwise people can be led astray. And if somebody wants to, come at me with some accusations, fine, then accuse me, and then I'll defend myself. I'll say why those things aren't true. But the people, there's a politeness. In Canada, this is something that, there's a reason that I'm so rude and abrasive, and I think I'm a nice person in real life, but I often adopt a confrontational, agitating stance online. And it's because in Canada, you have this culture of politeness that prevents people from being able to talk about difficult subjects, and then I think that we need to look again to Occupy, because Occupy basically overnight, there was millions of people in the streets, and that could happen again, and I was reading something about, how the occupations of Tahrir Square, got started, and the organizer saying it's you organize year after year, and it's sometimes you organize demonstration, and if 70 people show up, then you're depressed. If 300 people show up, you're happy. And then one day, 70,000 people show up. That could happen again, when the conditions are right. And one thing that I think that we need to do is sort of expect that moment to happen and have a plan for it, and have a basis of unity that will be acceptable to the greatest number of people possible, and a plan to move in that right direction. And that plan can't be too specific, because, you're dealing with a lot of moving parts when you're talking about a social movement. But if there isn't a plan, then Occupy will play out in the same way that it did last time.
In some ways, you mentioned IMA. I think, in history, it's been a lot of organic reaction. Just people, wherever they are, when some sort of tyranny comes about, people just, again, the boot is on your face, and so people will get the pitchforks. And back in July, Parallel Mike, who's out in Poland, and Monica Perez, we just we're chatting, we're all friendly, and we just decided to organically, spontaneously create Cognitive Dissidence, a monthly roundtable that we do apart from our individual podcast. So that started in the summer. And then, Derek Brose, Ryan and Whitney Webb started an independent media alliance. I was thrown in with a bunch of other people. And so I think these are examples of groups that organically come together that overlap. I think that overlapping is key, kind of like what we're doing now, because I think we're mostly on the same frequency. And I think our differences can't be put aside, no, because we're dealing with, Cobra Commander Klaus Schwab, who wants to chip our brains and that sort of stuff. And also just your thoughts on BRICS. I think all of us here agree that multipolarity is a sham. And I was on Charlie Robinson's show the other day. He asked me to come on Macro Aggressions to talk about Lutz's Trust, Lucifer Publishing, which I like to call. And Lutz's Trust, which believes Lucifer is the Christ, and that he's here on earth now waiting to be unveiled to save the world. They just wrote in their latest newsletter, BRICS is the divine economy. So they're getting behind BRICS and multipolarity and saying that, yes, this is the way. And I like to show this. This is from 2009, the Arcane School. If people can see on my camera's getting a bit blurry, but this is from Lutz's Trust. I attended one of their meetings in Geneva in 2009, and on one of the first pages, they talk about Lucifer being Prometheus. But anyways, my point is that we see these false dichotomies, whether it's Trump-Kamala in the U.S. at the national level, or East versus West, global, and I think it's duping a lot of people, the whole BRICS thing, because I mean, you look at all those countries, they're more advanced than the technocracy. They're implementing the digital currencies, QR codes, vaccine passports, and so any of your thoughts just briefly on BRICS?
Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. Well, no, just BRICS. Well, I've been looking at BRICS and I've seen what you've seen there. In fact, it's just it's a complete trick. China is the basis for this new world order and everything they're doing in China, and Russia's not far behind in implementing the same. And I did a big article on the BRICS countries a couple of years ago now, I think it was, and you can see it's the same money, it's the same organized crime that has long been in charge of through the triads and since the time of the Opium Wars, and that was the British Empire. But what was behind the British Empire? Well, that was the banking money, that was the Rothschilds, etc. behind that. And the same, India obviously was directly part of the empire, and Russia has been taken over for some time, I think, including with the communist years, which were also controlled from Wall Street and London, the city of London. So, but it's just a transfer of the power base. It's more recently it's been America. Obviously now it's just the end of the American spell of global domination, of being the vehicle for the organized crime syndicates control. Before that was the British Empire. Before that, maybe it was some would say it was the Dutch or Venetians, and you can trace it back and see a sort of continuity of the way that they use different bases for their activities. And now the time has come to abandon the USA and to base it on the upcoming Russia, China, Silk Road. I don't know what role Greater Israel might play in all that as well. And then Africa being the big project for development in the decades to come. So it's just shifted. It's shifted. It's not the end of the empire. It's the empire putting on a different disguise to continue its nefarious activities, unfortunately. So it is sad to see so many people rather gullibly falling for it and cheering it on when they should really know better.
I like the Stefan Molyneux analogy that when you look at all the countries of the world, you're looking at different tax farms. You're looking at different tax plantations where the farmer is using different types of government, like the same way that you might give some of your livestock more privileges than other pieces of livestock, or you might have different policies to manage your swine, then you're managing your cattle, or what have you. But all of these governments are essentially running the exact same playbook of techniques. There's a mandatory government school where you're taught that the government is legitimate, desirable, and necessary. There's a state affiliated youth program, the Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, and the Young Pioneers in Russia. It's a certain group of the kids are going to be indoctrinated into the uniform, the single form. They're going to engage in the flag worship. They're going to have their head shaved. They're going to be segmented off from the rest of the population. They're going to be taught to kill. And so it's the exact same techniques being run, all over the place. What I believe is that in the case of the United States is very, very interesting. It's essentially the most problematic tax farm for the organized crime system running government on all of these populations, because number one, we have the most powerful military in the world. Number two, we have a kind of history of liberty where people believe that they have rights, and that the idea of freedom has been enshrined in the population. But number three, the thing that makes us the most interesting is that we're one of really three civilizations that are still armed. It's essentially us, the Israelis, and the Swiss right now, and the amount of weapons that we have. If there was ever a revolution here in the United States, and we were able to get the military, explain to them how they're being tricked and how the game was run on them, and get them on our side and take back control of that military, we could go and we could round up these bankers, and we could round them up. We could go any place, air mobile, air cav. We can go any place on this planet, and we can clean this mess up. And so what I think is, that what you're seeing in the United States is a planned implosion, is they're removing pieces out of the Jenga tower one by one to collapse the only plantation on this planet that actually threatens the power structure as it exists today. And also, we are the heart of the information revolution. We are where the internet, started. And we've got one of the most wired up populations, and so this is the knowledge of what's really going on and who is behind it is spreading very, very rapidly here in the United States. And so what you're seeing them take down the United States to try and move the power center over to China, where they have where they're running kind of government 2.0 on the population, where the population doesn't think that they have any rights, and there isn't the illusion of a constitution, and there isn't the illusion, there's a social credit score, and there's 100% censorship of the internet, and there is no private property, and there is no firearm ownership. And so that's what I think you're seeing right now, is you're seeing the United States being collapsed because we're armed and we're figuring out who robbed the bank, and we're starting to saddle up and get the posse ready to go after them.
Yeah, I like both of your takes, but I kind of disagree a bit with both interpretations of what's going on. I kind of think what's happening is a slow motion collapse of this banking system that was not built to last, that was designed, with short-sighted, greedy people making decisions that benefited them in the short term. And then the increasing concentration of wealth that happens over time, especially when you have a stock market that's rigged. That's the thing that a lot of people don't know, is that the game is rigged. That with a high frequency trading, they have different order types, and they process certain orders by certain preferred firms faster, which gives them an unfair advantage, which is the reason you have the BlackRocks and the Vanguards and the State Streets that have, nobody had heard of them 10 years ago, unless you're in the financial sector. And then they've taken over everything. That isn't just because they're better at making bets. It's because the game is rigged, and the game is rigged to benefit certain players. So I just wrote an article called China's Achilles Heel that looks at the Chinese economy, and it's difficult to imagine that they would do well. if there was a collapse of the US dollar. I personally think that this is a mathematical inevitability that you will have a, I guess the term that people are using is the currency crisis. It's like green anarchists long have overused the word collapse, so I try not to use the word collapse too much. But at a certain point in time, the American people, I think, will lose faith in the power of the U.S. dollar. This is something that's happened many times before. It happened in Weimar Germany. It's happened in Latin America. God knows how many times, or in Africa. It's happened many times before, and I think that this will happen. I don't think it necessarily means blood in the streets, or I'm hoping that what you mentioned in Appalachia, Hurricane Helene. It's very heartening. It's inspiring. It shows that when people need to, they can come together. And I like to frame it that way. It's like, when Argentina's currency hyperinflated, it wasn't, there were tough times, but they got through it. They got through it without like millions of people dead in the streets, And so I'm hoping for something like that. And then I see the problem of bloat. I see the problem of bureaucracy as the Achilles heel of the people who want to centralize power. And, there is a cost to bloat. There's a cost to, and that cost is in efficiency and effectiveness. The larger a system is, the more difficult the more difficulty it has responding to changing conditions on the ground. Basically, it becomes stupider. And I think that where this is heading is a breakdown of the kind of what holds the global financial system together. And that doesn't mean we're going back to the Stone Age. I think that it would more likely mean a deglobalized world. I think that is, at a certain point, there's something called Parkinson's law, and centralization of wealth can continue for a certain amount of time, but at a certain point, that succumbs to diminishing returns, and it becomes more effective for an organization or to break into different parts. So, in a sense, I don't think that. It's like if we're talking about like multipolarity in the way that like Matthew Arite and others do, where it's like, it's the New World Order, but awesome this time. Fuck that. But in terms of like the global order breaking into regional blocks, that doesn't strike me as implausible.
I think that's where we're going. But what Etienne said earlier, government 2.0, I actually think it's government 3.0, my running thesis. I hope to have time eventually to write about this, but I think BRICS is world government 3.0, because you had League of Nations 1.0, UN, and Bretton Woods was 2.0. People argue that 1971, petrodollar, gold, delinking created Bretton Woods 2, which we're living in currently, and World Government 2.0, United Nations. Now there's talk of creating a Bretton Woods 3.0, plus the BRICS political system. So would be the third. BRICS would be the third iteration. Bretton Woods 3.0 would be the third iteration of the economic system. And even the Russian ministers, the past few days, they're saying we need to create new Bretton Woods-like institutions for BRICS because IMF and World Bank aren't working. So I think that's where we're going. And I did want to bring up, just for giggles, voting. I've finally come to the conclusion that voting does not represent any power on our end. We're playing by the rules of their game. Voting, whether it's elections in the UK or US, and I think all of us are fans here of David Knight. I really like David Knight, and myself from a Christian perspective, I've lately been saying. And people can, individually believe what they want to believe, but I actually believe that it's biblical to not vote. The biblical thing would be to not vote because you're participating in a simulation. It's a lie. You're not supposed to lie, right? You're supposed to be for truth. Don't lie, don't kill, don't steal. But if you're participating in a lie, well, then you're a liar. And David Knight some people that I used to respect, Eric Metaxas, he tweeted the other day, if you don't vote, keep in mind that God will hold you accountable for the policies of those who are elected. And for the evil that they do. God is a judge. And then this other guy who we follow each other on X, and and David Knight was responding to each of them. This guy says, Joshua Hames, Christians, you have the choice between a non-Christian and an anti-Christian, vote accordingly. In my mind, you have a choice between two non-Christians or two anti-Christians. And I was supposed to have on a German theologian who thinks the same, Martin Erdmann, and he had a heart attack like a week ago, and I was supposed to have him on a few days after. But in his books, he writes that democracy today is basically this mystical occult religion, and that by voting, you are then participating in this sort of occult religion, which kind of overlaps with what Mark Passio says. And so I'm done with voting. And for me, the latest example, I'm a cow on 3 plantations: USA, Mexico, and Croatia, and we had the elections in Mexico. We had 3 options. All 3 are for globalist policies. AMLO's, Morena, and Scheinbaum say, let's copy the EU and make a North American Union. The other option was the old coalitions, who's Xochitl, she was the candidate. She's been to Davos. All of the old ruling parties of Mexico, many of their presidents were literally CIA agents. I've had on Jefferson Morley years past. He's the guy who declassified the documents that discovered that Mexican presidents were literally, they had code names like Li Tempo. And then the third option was Movimiento Ciudadano, the citizens movement. They're full on globalists. And so it's like you're just selecting the manager to run the globalist operation. So just quick, you guys' thoughts on voting. I don't think that's the way to go.
It's a rigged poker game. Don't play in a rigged poker game. I published actually on my Substack at artofliberty.substack.com today. I just published an article called "Don't Vote to Rob Your Neighbors This Election Season," the printable flyer. And we have like a printable flyer that you can go and explain voluntarism to your friends and your colleagues and your neighbors. But what I point out in the article is that, if you're voting or you're advocating, you're essentially advocating to rob your neighbors. You're advocating to, if you think about like what the Republicans say, it's like, elect my guy, he's going to rob everybody and he's going to put these policies into place. And the Democrats are saying, no, elect my guy and he's going to rob everybody and he's going to put these different somewhat little bit different policies in place. And what voluntarists are pointing out is, hey, let's not rob anybody. The world's a self-organizing system. It produces spontaneous order. We don't really need government. And that is the good karma option. That is I'm not advocating for somebody that is going to stab me in the back and try and push vaccines on my friends and family and neighbors. I'm not, that is the moral position. And I actually believe that a lot of the karma of people voting to impose their ruler on their friends, their family, and their colleagues means they get ruled themselves and end up not liking the results of what they have tried to impose on others. And so not participating in the rigged poker game really is the good karma alternative to voting in rigged elections on unauditable black box voting machines or with mail-in ballots. It's a joke.
Yeah, I agree. It's just obvious. It's obviously fake, the whole thing, the whole voting thing. I mean, casting aside the reality of the sort of choices that we're faced with today, like in Britain, obviously people were fed up with the Conservative Party, who were totally corrupt and authoritarian, and in the hands of the global crime syndicate. And so they got Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, who are just the same. It's slightly worse. In fact, they're slightly worse because they're slightly more ruthless about it. There was a sort of the Conservative Party. There's a bit more sort of got that sort of slight libertarian tinge around it still, for all its faults. But the Labour Party, now they've kicked out all the real radicals, the Corbyn supporters and the pro-Palestinians and the rest of it. It's just it's fascistic. I mean, it's supposedly of the left, and So what was the point of anybody taking part in that election? There was none at all. So, and sometimes we can be tempted when we see somebody that appears to be a real outsider coming through, and you think, oh yeah, maybe this time that something will change. But when you think about it, given the nature of the people ruling us and the power that they wield, why would they ever allow us to vote for somebody who's going to strip them of their power? It's not going to happen realistically. So yeah, I'd agree. It's best not just to not vote, but to encourage everybody else not to vote, and just to make it an irrelevancy, really. And the more that people don't stop following that particular spectacle, the more we can start to have them start thinking about issues more seriously and in a more a long-term way, rather than falling for it all. No.
Yeah, I think that way you vote with your dollars, you vote with your money, you start creating different institutions and giving less relevance to this corrupt government, and so eventually maybe something would start to give. And so to slowly wind down then, anarchism, voluntarism, rebrand, new cooperation. So thoughts on that?
Well, my revolutionary program is simple. It's the revolutionary program of many peasant movements throughout history. It's cancel the debts, redistribute the land. And so I think that what we should call for is a jubilee, forgiveness of debt, because so many of these debts were produced through fraud, or through an unjust social order. The banks were bailed out in 2008. These big corporations are continually bailed out. So I think that we need to burn the boats and just go forward into this unknown. Whatever happens, and that's to me, it's like reclaim the reset. The great reset is jubilee. The great reset is all debts getting wiped. And then when it comes to redistribute the land, well, that will be that goes together with canceling the debts, because it's this financial system. And I should say, I'm not talking about taking people's houses away. I'm talking about Bill Gates's farmland. I'm talking about all of the property owned by BlackRock is buying up houses, and it's like, I don't know.
Stolen through fractional reserve banking. The property that was stolen through fractional reserve banking.
Okay, yeah, redistribute the property stolen through fractional reserve banking. That's a better framing of it. I think that that this is a really positive step in the right direction of comparing notes, because I think that this conversation has shown that we have a lot more that we agree about than that which we disagree about.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the first step is just showing the illegitimacy of the current system, because it depends on fooling people into having loyalty to it in many different ways. I mean, the people who work for the American army or the British government think that they're working for their own country. They actually, I'm sure they do. That's why they're doing it. They think they're acting in the common good of their people. If they can start to see that, no, actually, it's this mafia that is actually controlling the particular state under which they're living and for which they're working, they're at the very least not going to be so enthusiastic about doing their job. So, I think that's how things might change. Would be a gradually sort of an undermining when the more people see, and this is why the authorities are panicking so much about the internet, and that they're losing total control. As I think somebody in Europe said, I can't remember who it was now.
Hillary Clinton.
Was it?
Hillary Clinton.
Oh, was it? Okay, it was Hillary Clinton. That's okay. Yeah. I've forgotten who it was. Yeah, but that's what they're worried about. They're losing total control of the narrative, not physical total control, but the control of what people are thinking. So if we can continue to spread information which reveals the reality behind this world and behind who's running it, is it going to have a physical effect in undermining its efficiency, in sapping its strength and its ability to control and dominate us. And from that can emerge a solidarity and a coming together of people united at the beginning, maybe just by the fact that they've seen through this gang of criminals ruling us and want to take back power into their own hands, into our own hands, everywhere.
So I want to agree with both of that, and I want to say that coming together and that gathering is happening on November 1st through the 3rd in Sedona. Liberty on the Rocks, the Voluntaryism conference, where we're bringing together, many of the experts in how do you have roads without the government? How do you have public goods without the government? How can you have armed protective services without the government? Because I think if most people understood that they could get everything they wanted from monopoly government besides the redistribution, better, faster, and cheaper, and that they would be much wealthier because they're not having they're not being taxed confiscatorially. They're not having their wealth stolen through inflation. They're not paying all of the hidden taxes the government dings you with every time you get a beer or pay your cable television bill or pay get a gallon of gas or pay your cell phone bill or buy an airline ticket or all the other places the way the government, dings you. People would be way wealthier, the economy would flourish, and we would have more than enough wine, cheese, and bread at the table to take care of the poor, the needy, the disadvantaged, the legitimate poor, needy, and disadvantaged. And so that's the better world that we're trying to, show people. And we're gathering November 1st through 3rd in Sedona, sedona.artofliberty.org. And if you three gentlemen would like to join us, I've got 3 free VIP tickets for you. If you can get there, we'd love to have you. I know it's at the last minute, but I'd love to see you guys come as well.
I have to ask Etienne, whenever I think of Sedona, I think of Aerosmith's Sedona Sunrise song. Are you going to play that at the start of the conference?
No, so it's funny. The conference starts with a party and a concert, and we've got world renowned harpist Peter Sterling is going to do a sound bath. We're doing a group meditation, and then there's a concert by Grant Presence Elman, who just dropped a brand new song with Derek Bros called "Taxation is Theft," and Larkin Rose and Amanda will be on the keyboards. And they're like, if you've never seen them play, they're really like, Larkin is an amazing artist. And so I'm just excited. The whole thing starts off with a concert, all day on Saturday, where there's a virtual event if you can't make it in Sedona, where some of the world leading experts in voluntarism will explain how you can have everything you want without the monopoly government. And then Sunday is fun day, where we're going yoga on the rocks and hiking on the rocks in Sedona, having a group lunch and a closing barbecue. So it's going to be a blast, and I hope everybody listening can join us either in person or virtually on the live stream.
And so I take it people can watch the replay as well if they miss live, yeah?
They can. It'll be on Civil, CIVL, which is kind of like a Netflix for intellectuals, libertarians, and voluntarists.
And I think this is your first conference, and do you plan to do more?
This is the second one. So we did it last year, and now we're doing it bigger, badder, and more amazing.
All right. So this was a fascinating chat. You can get, again, Etienne's conference is there. All the links are in the description. We've got his book. If Crow and Paul, you guys want to just mention where people can best find you. I love the writing at Winter Oak. You're always spot on. And so I'm always sharing your stuff, Paul, and I'm on your list. So Crow and Paul.
Yeah, you could check my writing out at Nevermore Media on Substack. Subscribe to the newsletter, and I would also encourage folks to check out the booklet that Paul and I co-wrote, which is called "There's Nothing More Powerful Than an Idea Whose Time Has Come." And that is best thought of as a sort of addendum or a commentary on Paul's book, The With Way. So check that out as well. And thanks for the opportunity to appear on the show.
Good. And Paul, I guess,
Yeah.
last.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, thanks for doing this. Yeah, well, winteroak.org.uk is the main site. I've also got a Substack called Cudenec Substack. And there's Organic Radicals, orgrad.wordpress.com. That is more there. That's the sort of a philosophical background, the sort of list, profiles of various thinkers that I mentioned earlier on. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that booklet. Go to Winter Oak to get the booklet that I just mentioned.
All right. All the links are in the description. Nevermore Media, Winter Oak, and the others, and Liberty on the Rocks, Art of Liberty, the books. So follow these folks, and thank you, gentlemen, for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.